For over a week, anti-government demonstrations have emerged across Iran. At this point, protests have been reported in dozens of cities, with at least 20 people confirmed dead in sporadic clashes between protesters and law enforcement units. In the Iranian capital, more than 450 people have been detained. Yet, despite the media hype, the unrest does not bear the signs of a revolution. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. The details on the origins of the protests are scarce, but it is believed to have started on December 28th in Mashhad, which is the second most populous city in Iran. Mashhad, located in the northeast of the country, is also a political stronghold for the conservative faction. The initial protest in the city was in response to a price hike for poultry products, which surged by nearly 40% in recent days. Before long, there were complaints about unpaid wages, unlicensed credits, petty corruption, fraudulent bankruptcies, and much more. Later on the same day, rallies were held in nearby towns, and conservative politicians sought to exploit the situation and encouraged further demonstrations in hopes of hurting the credibility of the moderate faction led by President Rouhani. However, as footages and images of protesters spread on the social media apps, the conservatives soon lost control over the situation. By December 29th, anti-government crowds emerged in the capital and other major cities such as Isfahan, Tabriz, Hamadan, and many others. What started out as frustrations over food prices soon included all kinds of grievances. In this framework, the motives fueling the demonstrations are sporadic. There is no unified objective. For instance, some footages in Mashhad captured chants such as "Death to Rouhani," while in Tehran there were anti-Khamenei chants such as "Death to the dictator." In this reference, it should be noted that both figures belong to different political factions. Check out our report on the history of Iranian politics for more on this topic, but other slogans that were chanted by protesters opposed the country's foreign policy, such as "Let go of Syria, think of us." Still others advocated for regime change, and in one instance, a pro-government media outlet published a photograph that depicted a protester burning the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran. These sporadic and contradictory chants illustrate that the unrest is neither a movement nor a revolution. Moreover, when compared to the Green Movement of 2009, the current demonstrations are small in size, lack coordination, leadership, and organization. However, this does not mean that the grievances of Iranians are illegitimate. Besides the obvious lack of civil rights, the deeper issue in Iran is the economic dilemma that the public deals with. Among the problems are the increasing living costs. Even though inflation has dropped from about 35% in August 2013 when Rouhani first took office to 8.4% in October 2017, macroeconomic indicators do not always translate to real-life situations. Inflation in Iran is affected by Washington's restrictions on trade in dollars, which complicates Tehran's securement of foreign exchange reserves. At the same time, Iran heavily relies on the import of food that is procured by US dollars. Due to the restrictions on foreign trade, the Ahmadinejad administration introduced the Subsidy Reform Plan. The idea was to channel $100 billion spent on subsidies each year to bolster the industrial sector as well as to support the lower income classes by stabilizing the average consumer price. Yet, in spite of the intended effect, the opposite happened. Since its implementation in 2010, living costs have steadily grown, but real wages have increased too little to compensate. As a result, the purchasing power of the Iranian public has decreased over the years. People have had less money to spend, which is why fluctuations in food prices is a particularly sensitive issue. Rouhani was legally bound to go through with the subsidy reform plan, but in a twist of irony, the conservatives who introduced the subsidy policy blamed the ruling moderate group for the economic grievances. Another economic obstruction in Iran is unemployment. It remains a major problem in the larger cities. However, disguised unemployment or underemployment is a more widespread dilemma. The truth is that a large segment of the Iranian society is highly educated in fields such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Yet there are not enough suitable jobs to meet the qualifications of the workforce. And a lot of this has to do with the continuously changing labor laws of the country. As a result, millions of Iranians are employed in jobs that do not use their skills. So rising living costs and employment greatly contribute to the frustrations of the Iranian people. In essence, the economic anomaly in Iran, where inflation drops and yet living costs increase due to the subsidy reform plan, is somewhat a combination of Venezuela's dependency on oil and Greece's tax and subsidy inefficiencies. Unless the subsidy reform plan and the labor laws are revised, living standards in Iran will continue to decline, which will continue to spark unrest. One more factor that contributed to the stagnation of the Iranian economy was the implementation of the nuclear deal by the Trump administration. With the diminishing threat of ISIS, cooperation between Washington and Tehran decreased over the course of 2017, and Iran returned to its attempts to project power into Iraq and Syria, while the United States went back to its containment policy. The turn of events led to President Trump's refusal to certify the nuclear deal in October 2017, which stalled potential foreign investment in Iran. In general, Tehran enjoyed a growth in GDP and government finances for roughly a year and a half before it returned to its old problems. Moreover, in that duration, the macroeconomic indicators did not improve the financial environment of the mainstream population. Now, as important as these financial events are, there is another catalyst for the protests in Iran. It is often assumed that low standards of living and economic desperation induce political instability, yet this is not necessarily true. Revolutions are rarely ever triggered by the absolute level of poverty, but rather by poverty in relative context. In other words, people can tolerate poverty and misery as long as it fits within the circumstances. The trouble starts when politicians make convincing promises over a period of time but fail to deliver the expectations in the end. At such a point, the threshold of tolerance is surpassed and people burst in frustration. The result is often unrest or revolution. This theory of mass disillusionment explains why sometimes wealthy countries experience revolutions while poor countries maintain stability. The point is that people can tolerate poverty and misery if it fits within a reasonable context. In Iran, that context faded away when Rouhani secured his second term in office in May 2017. He had promised economic prosperity, and although he reduced inflation, stimulated economic growth, bolstered the government's finances, and freed up Iranian exports, the macroeconomic indicators never materialized in prosperity for the public due to the subsidy reform plan. What's more is that all of Rouhani's economic efforts occurred in an environment where public expectations were disillusioned by the promises of the nuclear deal, which entered effect in January 2016. The Iranian public had anticipated significantly greater prosperity, but even after a full year, the improved macroeconomic prospects have yet to result in better financial conditions for the average Iranians. Rouhani and his allies have acknowledged the concerns of the protesters, but the president also said that further violent antisocial behavior will not be tolerated. This admission gives the Rouhani administration a sense of urgency. However, many of the economic issues require an overhaul of the subsidies and labor laws, which will require time. Along the way, more protests are bound to emerge. That being said, no political faction has endorsed the current demonstrations as it does not benefit them. It is possible that leadership emerges over time, but unless that happens, the current unrest and future protests are unlikely to withstand the security crackdowns over a longer period of time. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. Special thanks to our contributors on Patreon for making this report possible. Visit patreon.com/Caspian report for more information on our platform. All the financial funds help to keep our channel independent and self-sustained. You can also make anonymous donations with cryptocurrencies. See the description for our Bitcoin and Ether addresses. For now, thank you for watching, take care, and Sağ ol.